So first of all, happy Christmas in a couple of days. So this is my Christmas photo. And just like me, you'll always find me on the backs of the small people.
Okay.
Every Christmas, people speak to me over press outlets and want to talk to me about rough sleeping at Christmas. What can people do about it? Why we've got a problem? And why do people only care about it at Christmas? And these are really, really good questions. I've spent nearly 2 decades working in homelessness. First, so many years was with the council in Manchester, where I chaired a multi-agency panel where we'd look at individual rough sleepers, trying to get them help, support, look at their bail conditions, look at what help they needed. And in Manchester City Centre at that time, there were 17 people sleeping rough. Now there's hundreds, slightly less than there was, but there's still a lot. Then I left the council and I set up a charity, and I set up some homeless projects within that charity. So me and my staff spent years walking the streets of Manchester City Centre, like the photo here, speaking to people, trying to get help and support that they needed. Basically trying to get them off the streets and into accommodation. Then I set a homeless employment project up, and we got 44 former rough sleepers jobs on building sites in 1 year. And that project cost 25 grand. Which is absolutely amazing. And the last project I set up was one called Room to Read. Because when you're homeless as a child and you get moved about to different B&Bs, it ruins your education, because you can't go back to the same school because you're now 15 miles away. Yeah. And you haven't got a car, you can't get a bus. So you're not in education for months and months. So I set a little project up to find these kids working with the council, and we delivered them books. So they could read novels or science books or whatever, because we wanted them to try to keep up some sort of education. Wasn't great, but it's better
than nothing.
It's better than nothing. They're just being dumped 30 miles away with the mum usually, and it'll take 6 months to get them to local primary school. Well, that's 6 months, a long time for a child with no education. So I talk about that really because I just want you to understand that I know what I'm talking about in this. And then in 2019, my charity won Homeless Projects of the Year in Greater Manchester.
I take it that was before you were fired for being woke and not woke.
Yes, yeah. So this was a couple of years, a year before my transgressions of the Black Lives Matter.
This was a year before you were outed for being based. Right?
Yes, okay. Yeah, absolutely. So the questions are, people ask me all the time, how can you help rough sleepers, especially at this time of year? What can you do? And why do you want to help? Is it to reduce your guilt? Is it to make that Christmas meal you're going to taste that little bit better knowing you've helped somebody? Is it to stop you feeling guilty that you're going to spend £70 on alcohol on Friday night when you go out with your friends and you're going to walk past half a dozen of people sleeping in cardboard boxes around your city centre? You need to work out why you want to help.
Surely because it's the right thing to do.
That's what they will. Yeah, it is the right thing to do to help.
Yeah.
There's different ways of helping. So the first question I say to people is, would you like me to tell you the one thing you can do now to help rough sleepers?
Okay, go on.
The answer is nothing.
Oh, well, that makes my life easier.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do, because if you could help rough sleepers now with a mince pie, of a woolly hat, of a couple of quid in a paper cup, there'd be no rough sleepers in the UK. It's a complicated issue. It's basically a mental...
That's a great point. I never even thought about it that way.
It's a mental health epidemic that we're letting people fall through the cracks in our society.
But surely they'd appreciate a mince pie either way.
They would. What they want, not what they want. The best thing you can do with somebody who's rough sleeping is give them some of your time. So instead of just ignoring them when they ask you for a couple of pounds, you stop, you say, hello, I'm sorry, I've got no money on me. I'll talk about what not to give people, but I've got no money on me. How are you? Do you need some help? Find out where the local shelters are. Tell them where the shelters are. They all know where the shelters are, but tell them where the shelters are. Tell them to have a nice day and be on your way, because it grinds people down and it makes them feel inhuman when you sit on a cold, wet pavement and you're 5 foot below everybody else, and most people don't even look at you as if you're a human and don't even make eye contact with you. And that destroys you inside so much over time. It just chips away at your self-worth and your self-confidence, and in the end you are what you're portraying to be.
So you always you always say, as far as I'm aware, don't give money to homeless people. But the thing is, that's really the only charity I do. But I always try to be nice about it. Like, here you go, mate. You know,
Yep. And then
just try to treat them like I'd treat anyone else. You know,
well, I've been here a few times. You've never given me any money.
you're not homeless.
So let's look at the
I do have to pay you, and you say no.
let's look at let's look at the money side of things. So you give them a fiver, a tenner.
Yeah.
They were homeless
I'll give
yesterday.
him a tenner, Jesus.
They were homeless before you gave them anything. You give them a tenner, and they're homeless again tomorrow. Have you solved anything?
No, but they might at least be able to get a Big Mac or something.
So the vast majority of the money given to homeless people on the streets is spent on drugs. In every city centre in town, there's places where you can go get free food, and the shelters, the community centres. I worked out in Manchester a couple of years ago that you could eat 17 hours a day for free every day of the week in Manchester.
Can I?
17 hours a day.
I do like the idea of eating for 17 hours a day for free.
For free. So all that money spent on drugs.
Right.
What
okay.
that money does when it's spent on drugs is it breaks them a little more. They're then harder to get help and support because they don't want help and support, because all they're thinking about, next 3 hours I need more drugs. And the more money we give them, the harder it is to help them, and they're slowly dying on the streets. The worst thing you can do to people begging is to give them cash. So people say, oh, I don't give them cash anymore. I now give them a meal deal. I'll buy them something to eat.
That seems reasonable. But
yeah,
they're
and
not
that seems
hungry, are
reasonable.
they?
So what does a meal deal do? So they may eat the meal deal, but they're sat on a corner, so they're eating it on the floor like an animal.
Yeah.
They're not sat at a table and chairs with a knife and fork. They're sat on a dirty, wet, cold floor eating like an animal. And now that they've had a sandwich, a Mars bar and a Coke, they now don't need to go to that community centre to get a nice hot meal, because I've eaten now. It means I can sit here longer and beg for longer and earn more money. So they get more drugs when you feed them. And also, it's only when we get them to go to the community centre that the social workers and support workers can start talking to them and start unpicking their lives and trying to work out the best way for them to move forward and get help and support. So every time you give someone a meal deal, you've just stopped them getting help that day.
It's a good point. I mean, it's quite a harsh thing to say to someone, because obviously a regular person might, yeah, well, I was just doing some good. And so I suppose the argument would be, well, donate some money to the shelter then.
That's my next point. So then people say, how do I help? Because I want people to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want everybody to try to help. This shame on our country. Now we've got thousands of people living on the streets that we didn't have 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
We solved it in the 80s and the 90s. We've just let it all come back.
When I was a kid, it was shocking to see someone on the streets.
Yeah.
It was just shocking. But now it's really not that uncommon.
Yeah, it isn't at all. So what do you need to do? So you can't help him now at Christmas. You can't help him now. There's nothing you can do now. But this time next year, if you start helping today, there's something you can do. And what I advise is you find a small local charity, not one of the big ones, not shelter, they're a waste of time, but a small local charity that does face-to-face work with the vulnerable. And you set up a direct debit, a couple of quid a month, a week. I'm not asking for lots of money, but a constant direct debit. You've done your bit. These small charities rely on these donations, and they know they've got that coming in, and they can help these people with that money. If you've got more time on your hands, then volunteer at a centre, because you might think, well, I've got no skills, what can I do? Well, here's an example. If you help with breakfast, you can make the toast, which means a support worker doesn't have to make the toast, and that support worker can spend more time sat at the tables talking to the clients.
So have you considered that perhaps young people today are totally incompetent and don't even know how to make toast?
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Just teasing. Go on.
So,
I'm going to credit you with the ability to make toast.
but rough sleeping is extremely complicated. Let me give you a couple of examples. So I remember working with a man who told us he'd had 10 flats in the last 15 years. And every time he gets a flat, he fails, he ends up back on the street, and the cycle starts all over again. He'd had 10 flats in 15 years.
Yeah, I've heard stories like
So what we're doing, I mean, a lot of the services and the councils, a lot of it's incompetence. So we'll put somebody in a flat.
Incompetence at a local council.
Tell me
Can
about
you
it.
believe it? Yeah.
We'll dump somebody in a one-bedroom flat in the middle of nowhere where they don't know anybody, and we wonder why the
Get
walls
on.
closing.
Good luck. You're on your own. Yeah.
We
I
don't deal
can
with the
see.
mental health. We don't deal with the drug issues. You end up back on the street, and the cycle starts again. But then we also have to remember and realise that not everybody you see on the streets is homeless.
No, I saw.
If
So
you've got
just
the next link, please, John.
just to jump in here, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one of these in Swindon not so long ago where some guy was making like 30 grand a year begging.
Yeah.
And I was like, my wife told me about it. I was like, what? That can't be true. And she's like, yeah, apparently he owns a house. He pays for it begging. I'm like, that little git. Like, he comes up to you and he's like, oh, mate, I just need 50p for the bus.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, I'm pretty kind. Here's 50p. And I had given to this guy previously. And it turns out he was making more than me at the time. I was
Yep.
like, cheeky shit.
Some of the stories are actually urban myths. So when you hear the
Right.
stories that he's got a BMW round the corner, and
Yeah,
he drives to the leafy suburbs, and he gets changed back into his, Adidas tracksuit and goes home, they're all rubbish.
Right.
But the majority of people sat on the streets begging are not homeless. My charity did a survey in Manchester Centre in 2019. It would have been 18-19. We found 65% of the people sat there begging were not homeless. 65%.
Most homeless people are not homeless.
Are not rough sleeping.
No, I know.
Yeah.
But the point is the framing when you see someone sat on the street
Yeah.
begging for money, the implication, the assumption is, oh well, that's a homeless person.
Yeah.
Right. But actually, they're not. But
They're normally on full benefits. They're normally in a council house or in a B&B or something like that. They go begging every day because that's how they earn their money for drugs.
Right.
And I've seen so many times people who are not rough sleeping, pretending to rough sleep to earn money for drugs 6 months down the line, then be rough sleepers because the amount of drugs they took ruined them so much that then they became what they were pretending to be, and that's quite a common thing you see.
Right.
So that's why you should never give people on the streets money, because the vast majority of times
You don't know.
they don't need it because they're not homeless, and it's all spent on drugs. It really is spent on drugs.
And it's not like we don't have enough support systems in this country. Like, you can go to the government. I don't have a house. I don't have any food. And they will get you food that day.
Yep.
They will get you food that... I know, because when I was like in my early 30s, I was unemployed for a bit. And I was like, oh, God, I haven't got anything in the house. Went down there, and they're like, is it an emergency thing? I was like, well, kind of. I'm not going to have dinner tonight. And later that day, I got a payment of like 30 quid or 40 quid or whatever it was into my bank account, which is, of course, enough to buy some food. And I was like, okay... at the time I was like, oh, well, that's good. But it didn't occur to me there are going to be people who are going to be like, oh, that is good. I can take advantage of all of this.
It's a job. Begging is a job. So if you're
And they don't even pay taxes.
don't pay taxes on the money they earn.
There's so much ahead.
They're all on full benefits. So there's some urban myths. Let me explode here now.
Yeah.
So people will say, well, if you're homeless, you can't get benefits. You haven't got an address. You do not need an address to claim benefits. That got stopped in the 80s.
Yeah.
You don't need an address to register with a GP. You don't need an address to open a bank account.
Really?
So some of the services, some of the community centres have deals with the bank, like the Co-op. That's one we used to use in
That
Manchester
they
City
can use
Centre.
their address.
And they will use their address and do the checks, and you can have a bank account without having your own address. So all the problems you think have all been eradicated decades ago. And if you get someone saying to you, I'm saving up for a B&B and I got to save £13 every day and I've only got 9, I need £4 so I can get a bed tonight. Well, the answer is, have you heard of something called housing benefit? All the hostels are paid for by housing. Why wouldn't it be paid for by housing benefit?
You are shining a light on a grift that I have encountered myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And these people are broken, and all we do when we give them money and we enable them to live on the streets is we're helping them kill themselves. If somebody was sat outside a shop with a cardboard sign saying, I'm saving up to buy a knife to slice my wrists, you won't give that person any money. But the same person without that sign sat on the street corner is killing themselves over years on drugs, but people give that person money. We're still killing people. We're enabling them to live on the streets.
It's not the compassionate thing to do.
No. Another example I can give you, I remember talking to a young 19-year-old lad in Manchester City Centre. If you're under 25, it's easier to get you into accommodation if you're sleeping rough. We can sort it that day. because you're under 25. We spoke to him. He said he was 19, and we thought, fantastic, this will be an easy win. Staff like it when we help somebody, so an easy win is like, well, it keeps me going for tomorrow. And we said, oh, we can get you accommodation right now. We went, I don't want accommodation. But you're sleeping in this tent in the middle of Manchester City Centre.
Why wouldn't you want accommodation?
And he went, well, if I wanted accommodation, I'd go home. I'd go home to my bedroom at my mum's.
Great point. Yeah.
So why are you sleeping here? He went, well, I was walking past here a couple of months ago and saw these tents. I got chatting with the guys and they were sharing their drugs. So I stayed and we shared drugs. And I started coming every day and going home every night. And then one night I thought to myself, why am I going home? To get a bus or to come back again in the morning? I might as well stay here. So I started sleeping in this guy's tent. And then one morning I was high as a kite and his car pulled up and this woman ran out and threw 2 black bin bags at me and went, there you go, love. And he said, in my high state, I opened one. One was a sleeping bag. I opened the other, it was a tent. So I put the tent up in the sleeping bag. I've not been home since. That's a woman who thought she was helping.
Yeah.
Enabled him to abandon his family home and his bedroom with his mum to live in Manchester City Centre for the drugs.
God, imagine how heartbroken his parents are.
Yeah. And he wasn't interested in help and support because he didn't want it and didn't need it. And like I said, it's hard to solve. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, was elected 6 years ago saying he's going to eradicate rough sleeping in 3 years.
Is he a Labour?
He's a Labour mayor.
So he's made it worse?
It's been nearly 6 years now. Mm-hmm. It's slightly better.
Oh, well.
But you wouldn't say it's eradicated. He said 0 rough sleepers in 3 years. It's been nearly 6. And it's slightly better than it was when he took over.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, given the fact that he's left wing, I would say actually, maybe he deserves a pat on the back because normally they just make it 10 times worse. No. So, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think he spent something like $500 million.
Oh my God.
$500 million.
Okay.
So
like he could have bought them mansions.
Yeah, exactly.
He could have literally just built new houses and forced them into them.
So gimmicks don't work. So if you've got a pit, let me bring it. That's it.
Oh, what a surprise.
So this is the homeless Jesus outside a church in Manchester City Centre.
Yeah.
Made of bronze. It was put there in 2018, I believe. And surprisingly,
probably cost 10 grand.
Nobody ever released how much that cost.
Oh, really?
The guesses were 80,000.
80?
The guesses were £80,000.
I was only selling it with 10
for the homeless Jesus, because Jesus was allegedly a homeless man, and if people see Jesus sleeping on that bench, they may treat homeless people a bit better. But do you know what? You don't need to look at homeless Jesus. You just walk around the corner in Manchester City Centre, there's homeless people everywhere.
Yeah.
But this is a gimmick of making people, the church, feel better about themselves. And we get gimmicks all the time.
Yeah.
I've seen gimmicks of vending machines with socks and soap, because the homeless people can buy a pair of socks and buy soap. It's like...
Oh, yeah, that's what they're interested in spending their money on.
Exactly.
Want some soap?
We've got coffee shops in Manchester City Centre who ask people to buy a homeless person a £5 coffee. And so if you buy it forward, when a homeless person comes in here, we will give him a coffee.
Yeah.
Do you know how many homeless people go into coffee shops?
Probably not that many.
I'd say hardly any, because they'll get kicked out because they smell.
Yeah.
And because they're drug addicts. Yeah. And because the coffee shops are sick of them using their toilets and injecting in there.
Yeah.
So homeless people don't go into coffee shops. So all the coffee shop does is double their profits. The coffee isn't even reduced. You're buying them a full price coffee. So
this is a problem that Starbucks in America had in like Portland and California, where they were like, oh yeah, we're gonna have we're come in homeless people, and suddenly it was just needles in the toilets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's just virtue signaling. Hits your bottom line, you kick them all out.
Yeah.
If we could have the next picture, the biggest con we have in the UK is the big
William?
issue. And here's the future king.
Didn't realise this was going to be an anti-monarchical rant.
But the big issue have got such a great reputation that you can get the future king of England to sell the big issue for the day in London.
Oh God.
The big issue is a con. The big issue may have started doing the right thing 35 years ago. But since I've been involved, so a good 15, 17 years, the big issue is legalised begging. That's all it is. The big issue doesn't even help rough sleepers.
Okay, tell me about it.
So the big issue now
So for anyone who doesn't know, for anyone outside the UK,
Yeah.
the big issue, you'll see who are presumably homeless people selling copies of this newspaper, which it used to be like £1.
It's £2 now.
It's £2 now, right? To purchase from them on the understanding that essentially you're helping this person work their way out of being homeless.
Yeah.
That's the way it's sold to you. So it's you can understand why it's persisted for such a long time.
Yeah. So 10, 15 years ago, they changed because they were making no money. They changed their aim, and we're going to work with rough sleepers, homeless, people at risk of homeless, and people who are basically short of money.
Right.
In 15 years, I've never met one person rough sleeping who sells the big issue. Not one in 15 years. In Manchester, it said not one.
Okay.
Because rough sleepers are too dysfunctional to be able to sell them.
Well, I suppose if they're mostly drug addicts, then
You've got to keep half the money back to buy tomorrow's stock of papers. So you keep 50%, you give 50% back and get some more papers. So they can't do that. A couple of years ago, they released some videos of people who work for the big issue, and we had one guy, English guy, who was saying the big issue is fantastic. I earn a wage out of this now. My job before was working on a building site, but I didn't like it. I didn't like the hours, so I left that. I now sell the big issue. I earn more money than working on the building site, and it's better hours.
well, from a capitalist perspective, I don't mind.
The big issue is encouraging people to leave full-time employment to sell a magazine on the street that's supposed to be helping rough sleepers. So people who buy the magazine think they're helping those homeless people across the city or town.
But it's not. It's
But
just
they're
a
not.
job.
It's just, the big issue is just a magazine selling business. That's all it is. So please stop buying the big issue. Complete waste of time, and you're doing no good with your money.
Unless, of course, you're just a big fan of the things they write in there.
I don't. Everyone I know has bought the big issue. I say to them, "Did you read it?" No.
Of course not.
You're buying out a pity and charity. That's all you're doing.
Yeah.
So the next link. So because this is, I can't get into all this in a 20-minute discussion. It's so complicated, rough sleeping, especially in the UK when we've got all our welfare systems and safety nets. It's just so complicated. So I decided to write a book about it. So I've got a new book out called The Making of a Beggar. But it's more than just about rough sleeping. This book starts looking at us as a society. I see so many similarities between what we're doing as a nation and those people sat on those street corners, broken, on drugs and begging. And it's all about a lack of personal responsibility. It's always about who's going to give me what I want. It's never, how can I earn what I want? And I'm talking about society now. Look what happened at COVID with the lockdowns and paying people to stay at home, and then people wanted to stay at home. Look at how we're all becoming this victim culture. And when you talk to people sat on the streets begging, they're victims, and they'll tell you about how bad their life was, and it was never their fault, and their mum did this, their dad did that, and the world's out to get them, and social services took my kids off me. It was all a lie because of a neighbour. None of them ever take responsibility because they've got to cocoon themselves in this excuse that it wasn't their fault. Otherwise, it's a hard life to live. And that's what we're doing as a nation. And this book explores our politicians, the fact that they beg for our votes. We beg for favours off them. We look at some of the unintended consequences, such as we send all the clothes we don't want. We send them all to Africa now to dress our poor Africans. And the Africans don't want it. It destroys their textile industry. And we have African children being brought up in second-hand white people's clothes. That destroys the whole culture.
Yeah.
And we're making problems all the time. But we stand up and go, I'm virtuous. Look at me doing this. I'm amazing. And this book explores all that. But it's so complicated that what you think you know about rough sleeping and homelessness, I can guarantee you're wrong, or what you think you know.
I'm definitely wrong about what I thought I knew, because I give money to rough sleepers, quote unquote.
Don't be doing it.
Yeah,
again.
I know.
Find a support centre, direct debit.
Yeah, I'll give them money instead. Yeah, fair point. Well, what's interesting about this is it goes against the ingrained view of compassion that people have, right? Because they're like, yeah, but if I give them this, then that's me showing direct compassion. But this is a real sort of crutch that we've got to get past. Like, look, sometimes just giving, like, you know, if a morbidly obese person came up to you and said, I'm really desperate for a cake, you wouldn't be like, okay, I'll give you the cake because, of course, that makes it, I was such a good person. But like, no, it's obviously not in your interest, you know.
Homeless person, rough sleeper, said to me once, I was trying to talk to him, because I'm not interested. I'm too busy. I'm working. I went, working? You went, yeah, this is my job. My job is to make sure that everybody walks past, feels sorry for me, and realise their life's better. That's my job. And it's like, you get this, don't you? You get how to pull on heartstrings. Yeah, that's how you earn money. So they'll give you a couple of quid, not because they care about you, because they don't. Makes them feel better. A lot of things we do to help other people is really about making us feel better.
Yeah, and I mean, like you say, like a couple of quid, you can get 1 or 2 quid from each passer, you know, every 10 minutes or something. Suddenly you're making, you know, a fair amount of money every day.
A good beggar at Manchester City Centre earns £400 a day.
What?
A good one. An average one earns 100 quid.
I don't think, do I earn? I don't know. I don't think I earn that. So practice being a beggar, right? Okay.
And then how this damages people. So I remember talking to another beggar on Deansgate in Manchester.
Yeah.
And he said the strangest thing to me. He said, well, I'm better than a rat. And I went,
Well done.
well, what do you mean by that? He went, well, rats have to crawl through those bins to find food to eat, what people don't want. I'm lucky. People hand me the stuff they don't want. At least I'm better than a rat. And it's like, well, what have we done to that man?
Well, I mean, that is genuinely tragic. But 400 quid a day.
A good one. You got to be good. A good one.
Yeah. Oh, I'd be the best, man. I'd be an amazing beggar if I was going to be a beggar.
Thanks very much for watching that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters, and I hope you're having a very Merry Christmas right now. If you enjoyed that and want more, you can become a member on our website for as little as £5 per month to get access to all of our premium content, including a recent book club that Connor and I did on Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State and Utopia. And if you want to find out more of what Connor is doing on a day-to-day basis, you can follow him over at Getter at @Con_Tomlinson. Thank you and take care.